And so today is GISjobs Job Seeker Chat. And so basically the way that works is it's really an open forum for you to ask whatever questions you have. I'll give you some advice. I'll try and answer those questions. And you can either type your questions into the chat and I'll endeavour to answer them, or you can just come off mute and just ask your question at any time. So if anyone wants to kick us off with a question, if you have a burning question about resumes or applying for jobs or a visa process or anything like that, I'm more than happy to help. So welcome, Gus. I was just saying that it's an open forum for you to just ask your questions, either in the chat or just take yourself off mute and just fire away. If you need some advice about anything related to applying for jobs, your resume, your cover letter, anything like that, just let me know. There will be a recording made available afterwards if people want to review, and yeah, that'll be on both our YouTube channel and on the Together Spatial website as well. So does anyone want to kick me off with some questions? I might start with an observation and a piece of advice. For us, we work in the Australian job market, but obviously a lot of the places that we advertise, any positions or any social media or whatever, they're international, and people can join and be a part of it from anywhere in the world. But the big thing I just really wanted to point out is that, at the moment we're trying to fill a GIS manager role in Adelaide, in South Australia. And I posted it on LinkedIn, amongst other places. And LinkedIn have a free job posting up to so many applicants. So once you get more than that many applicants, the job's no longer free. That's how they make their money, which is fine. I posted that job, and within a few hours, I had 20 applicants. Even though the first line in the job ad said, don't apply unless you have a valid work permit for Australia and are willing to work in South Australia. All 20 were from overseas. And to me, that says two things: that they didn't even read the job ad. So therefore, if they were suitable, you would fail right at that point because you didn't bother to read the job description. And I think that's really important. I know it's competitive these days about trying to, get in early, but it's pointless applying for a job if you don't even meet the first hurdle. And that's not to say that you don't reach out to those companies that are advertising. I'm a big fan of networking. But if you see a job advertised, whether it's through GISjobs or XYZ company or whatever department, sometimes they'll have a contact detail. Well, then use that contact detail and go, is this open to international candidates? In the main, if a job is open to an international candidate, it will say that in the job. If a company is willing to sponsor, or they're, happy to have visas of a certain sort. If it doesn't say it, then assume that they're not providing those things. So it's just my piece of advice, because when all you do is then, you waste your time, in terms of applying. It's so easy these days to just click the apply button. But it doesn't do you any good by just applying for anything at random. And that's my biggest take out of that point, is that when you apply, make sure that you meet most of the criteria. You don't have to meet 100%. Often job ads are out there and they're looking for the ultimate person, and they might have 10 things in their selection criteria, but in reality, they're only going to get someone who's got 6 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. So if you meet the majority of them, then apply. But if you don't meet, some key ones, but you're interested in working in that company, then don't just apply, because you'll just get put aside and not. So the best thing is then to approach that company and go, yes, I'm a bit junior for that role. I'd be interested in being kept informed if something comes up. So be interested on people's feedback on that, or if you have any other questions or experiences. Gus, yes, seems like the job market is a bit strange at the moment. I'm applying for jobs that I definitely fit, have experience, have work rights, etc., but I'm mostly not even getting a response from recruiters. Thinking I'm getting lost in the noise somehow. Yes, and that's part of what I'm saying, because too many people are applying when they're not qualified. That just adds to the noise. So I had to go through 20 resumes the other day, and not one of them was suitable. And so that just adds to that noise. And so, yes, I agree, Gus. But what you have to do is then go, all right, why am I not getting a response? And I'm more than happy to delve into that deeper with you, either one-on-one at any stage, Gus. And sometimes it can be as simple as your cover letter is not structured right, or your resume doesn't have enough keywords, all those sorts of things. And they're things that I can certainly review for you, so have a look at those. If you've said you're not getting a response from recruiters, now sometimes if they're a generic recruitment company, often they've got so many competing priorities, and that's not an excuse for them not responding. I certainly think that it's a recruiter's job to respond both to the candidates and to the clients at all phases. But unfortunately, many recruiters are lazy, and they'll take the easy route, and they won't respond, or won't give you an update when you ask, and those sorts of things. Sometimes things do take time. If you're applying for federal government roles, sometimes they'll take 2 or 3 months to actually get through the process. And sometimes you think that's not getting a response, but it's just that's what it takes. But happy to try and delve into that deeper with you by either reviewing your applications, talking about any feedback that you have got, those sorts of things. If you want to do that, just reach out to me anytime. We can make some time to go through that more one-on-one. But yeah, it is about trying to get above that noise. And one way to do that is to try, I always recommend continuing to apply through Seek or LinkedIn or whatever. The downside of when you do that is that you're competing with everyone else who's applying. So the one way to get around that noise is to go, like, if you know that you're going to be looking for a new, say you're doing a contract and it's 6 months long, and so in 2 months you're going to be looking for a new role. This obviously doesn't work if you get fired or you lose your job abruptly, but I would still recommend doing this. So what you should be doing is going, what sort of companies do I want to work for? What sort of industries do I want to work in? And when you start breaking it down, then you start reaching out to the people in those companies and start networking directly with them. And then when you build up that rapport, and then hopefully you can be in the right place at the right time when they're thinking about hiring someone. So if you can get in before they go out, before they advertise, then they're not competing with anyone. Or if they do go out and advertise, then at least you're known, in some way. So you're not just, another resume coming across someone's desk. So hopefully that helps too. And, I talk about that sort of stuff a lot in these webinars. Networking is really key as a long-term career strategy. Most people change jobs quite regularly, not yearly or monthly or whatever. Well, I do. No, that I shouldn't say that, but I consider myself a professional contractor, so I'll go from project to project to project. So that's slightly different, but most people will probably stay in a job, 2, 3, 5 years, and then they'll look for something else. And so in that 2, 3, 5 years, that's where you should be networking and then keeping an eye out for the companies and when they're growing and the sort of people that work there and the sort of work that you want to do. So hopefully that helps. So does anyone else have any questions they want to throw at me in that respect? Sydney, occasionally the rejection emails do not provide the reason or the rejection. Do you advise follow-up email inquiring why? Yes, I do advise that. I also think it's really quite rude for companies just to use generic rejections. And I also think it's like if they've gone out to market to find someone and you've put in the effort to address their selection criteria and even if you get to interview and all those sorts of things, in my opinion, it should be that the hiring manager or the recruiter obligation to give you detailed feedback, and whether that's about your experience, about the interview, about the skills that you have. And most rejection emails will just go, they'll be really vague, thanks for applying, but we're not taking your application any further. That doesn't help you at all. So I do advise you try and follow up and go, well, why did you reject me? And you may get responses, but it's a hard thing because people will either just ignore the email or whatever. But it's a bit like what I was saying to Gus, is if you build up a bit of a network and rapport beforehand, you can then go back to those sorts of people and say, well, can you try and find out for me why I didn't get as far as I got? And when someone says, oh, we found someone with more experience, that's a real cop-out as well, from my opinion, because that doesn't help you either. What skill was I lacking? What skill did the other person have that was better than me? That's the sort of information you want from these rejection emails. Hopefully you don't get too many, but I do. When we're recruiting for organisations, it's something that I make sure that for every phase of the process that I give people feedback, and so yes. reach out and try to follow that up where possible. You may get some response, but you may not either. It's one of those hard things. All right. So hi, Adam. Welcome. I had a couple of people just join in. Hi, Charles. Hi, Kathy. So if you have a question, then by all means just put it into the chat or just come off mute and ask me that question. And hopefully I can help. All right, Kathy's got a question there. I'm not from Australia, don't have any PR or work permits. I have 9 years of experience in GIS. What are the chances of getting a job in Australia without PR and work permits? Do companies really sponsor for the work permits or PR? The answer is no. Your chances of getting a job in Australia with not necessarily PR, that's permanent resident, but you need a work permit. Everyone in Australia needs a work permit. And so if you don't have one, and a sponsorship is just a form of work permit. So, so you have to have that work permit. And the type of work permit varies for person to person. There's everything from, like you said, company sponsored ones. You'll rarely see those sponsors advertising. And the reason that you won't see them advertising is because the Australian government regulation for sponsoring an international candidate, they have to prove that they have tried to find someone locally first. And then once they've proved that they can't find someone, then they can go international. And then they can, get the sponsorship visa process started. So the jobs that you see advertised on Seek or LinkedIn or whatever, they normally need someone to start within a couple of weeks. And so they're not going to consider someone from overseas because that visa process can take multi-months or sometimes even multi-years, depending on where you come from, your age, your qualifications, your level of English, those sorts of things. So yes, and that's probably hard to hear, I guess. What are the chances of getting a job in Australia without it? And like I said, that it's nil. And so the issue will be is how do you get that work permit? And so once again, networking with companies that you would like to work for in Australia, reach out to them and reach out to their HR people, and they may have, an international candidate register for when those things come up. Network with people who can help, and on the other side is reach out to the Australian embassy closest to you. So whatever country you're in, there'll be an Australian embassy in most countries. And they'll be able to advise you on the sort of work permit that you can get. And so they range from everything from, working holiday visas, so you can come to Australia for a couple of years. That has an age limit. It's normally, 25 or 30 or something like that. You can get graduate visas if you've studied in Australia. You can then get a graduate visa. You can get what's called state-based sponsorship. So in the different states in Australia, each of the state governments will offer sponsorship. And now they don't provide you a job, but they provide that sponsored visa. And the only restriction to those is you have to work in that state. So if you get sponsored by South Australia, you have to work in South Australia for a certain period. So there's probably, up to 10 different visa types that you can get. So it's hard for me to give you advice on your specific circumstances. I'm not an immigration agent anyway, but I can give you some general advice. But my general advice always is to start with the Australian Embassy or the Department of, I think it's called Home Affairs now. They're the Department of Immigration. They'll have plenty of information on there. Do that research. more than happy to help with that research. There's skilled visas, and GIS and spatial technologies are on those skilled visas. So that is, a good positive as well. So hopefully that helped. But as soon as you get that work permit, you don't have to be in Australia. As soon as you get that work permit, then I can start helping you find something, find a job. Up to that point, I can give you general advice, but I can't put your application forward to any company or anything like that, because the minimum requirement is that you have work rights in Australia. Okay. Any other questions out there? That is certainly one I get very regularly, and as much as I want to help people, if they want to work in Australia, there's just that processes. Thanks again, Gus. I'll just stretch that out a bit. I've done a bit of federal government contracting over the years. Seems like security clearance is a requirement more often these days. Yep. Should I get baseline if I can? Will that open up significant opportunities from what you can see? Yes, it will open up opportunities, but you can't apply for it. Baseline security and NV1, NV2, and top secret. It's not called top secret anymore. It's called something else. But you have to be sponsored. So if there's a whole bunch of jobs that have been going for federal government, the Federal Department of Agriculture in the last couple of weeks through generic recruitment companies, and they needed an NV1. So that's that second level. The way to get that security clearance, it's a bit chicken and egg. So you need to actually work for a federal agent who will sponsor you to get that. And so you almost have to go, work in a role that has, low level need. And then once you get in there, they can do the baseline. It's just a matter of applying, but they still need to sponsor you. The NV1 probably takes about 10 months, not through an application, but just through bureaucracy and testing. NV2 can take a whole lot longer as well. And it's all about those, checks over the last 10 years. But yes, if you can get one, it certainly opens up a lot of doors for opportunities in the federal government. And it seems to be more and more they're now requiring at least baseline. So, yeah. Thanks, Gus. Adam, where would you recommend learning objective-oriented programming, Python, any good sites? All right. There's a whole bunch of them, and it depends on what you want to, the focus of it as well. There's certainly plenty of courses on places like Udemy that are either free or near free. YouTube have plenty of, snippet courses, where you're just learning bits and pieces here and there. We had a guest earlier in the year, Christian Lutz from Germany. He runs a WebGIS programming course, and he was terrific. He's terrific to learn programming and WebGIS. If it's more around, within an Esri environment, Esri have a whole bunch of free or near free courses through their training sites that you can do. And then there's just the obvious, self. Here in Australia, there's an organisation called Australian Water School, and they do a lot of training. NGIS do Python training. There's a whole bunch of spatial companies that will offer basic level courses as well. So, but initially I would sort of go, it sort of comes down to, all right, you've sort of got to ask, so what do you want the end to be, and then work back to what the good courses could be. If the ultimate goal is around GIS and to do web GIS or web analysis using Python, then certainly look at those companies, or Christian, or like I said, YouTube or Udemy or those sorts of places. All right. Hopefully that helped, Adam. But more than happy to investigate it further if you like, or have a further chat about that as we go on. All right. Any other questions that people have about their experience in applying for jobs, their barriers they're finding? Like, we've had a couple of good barrier questions just then. Visas are one big barrier. Baseline or security clearance can be a barrier if you want to work in defence or some of those higher level federal government departments. But yeah, most of them can be overcome. Like one of the when we're talking baseline and security clearances and stuff, then you have to be an Australian citizen to get those things. And so there can be some barriers there if you're a permanent resident or have a different visa. All right. Any other questions out there? Questions, comments, any other observations about the job market right now? There does seem to be some good movement happening right now. And I think that is partly because certainly here in Australia, it's the end of the financial year next month. And so organisations are gearing up for July and onwards. And so there's always a sort of seems to be a ramp up, certainly for contractors, into the financial year, and then obviously a slowdown around Christmas and January, and then it ramps up again, and then so it does this sort of up and down all year round. That's the life of a contractor, which sometimes that's good, sometimes that can be a bit stressful, but I do a lot of that sort of work, both within GISjobs. For those who don't know, GISjobs is we do sort of two broad things. So GIS consulting and GIS recruitment. And so we help organisations find people, we help people find their jobs, but we also do lots of GIS projects as well. Currently doing a project for one of the energy authorities in New South Wales, where we're looking at their data, getting it into a new system, and work for University of New South Wales. It really is opening my eyes up these last couple of years about all of the new companies that are getting into GIS that you had one I either hadn't heard of, or it's sort of an industry that is a great use for GIS but hasn't really adopted it well. And so in that respect, keep your eyes open for, if you're interested in exploring new industries, there's plenty out there that, rather than just the traditional, mining and resources and utilities and government and that sort of stuff, things like advertising and marketing, is a perfect GIS use case. Health, at a government level, the health departments have, they've got GIS teams, but hospitals now, some of the bigger hospitals have a GIS team, both from a marketing point of view and where are the patients coming from point of view, disease outbreak perspectives, all of those sorts of things. Until you sort of really think about it, you sort of go, oh, yeah, that's a great use of GIS, but may not be an industry that comes to your mind immediately. So. Right. Any more? About another 10 minutes or so. If anyone's got any more questions. So it can be about anything. Hopefully, sometimes I'll give you the very honest answer, but that doesn't mean it can't be overcome, like that visa issue. It's a matter of trying to find the path that can work for you, rather than so many people come to me, they'll apply for a job and they'll go, I was hoping that the company would sponsor me. And sometimes that's a bit about education. It's a bit about understanding the process, understanding that the sponsorship process isn't, fill in one piece of paper and it's done in a couple of weeks. It's a multi-months, multi-years sometimes, depending on what country people come from, what skill set they have. But the upside of those things, I'll just go to the question, what could be skills to be learned for long-term in the GIS? All right. That's a good question. Get that quite regularly. And it's sort of a bit like the answer to Adam's question. You almost need to start with the end goal in mind. So I broadly break the GIS industry into sort of three components. You have the analysis component. You have the developer type, web app type component, and then you have the data component. There are others, but broadly those three areas. And a lot of GIS professionals will do everything. They'll be partly database administrator. They'll do the analysis and the map production, and they'll also produce dashboards or web apps or publish data to the web for whatever reason. So it almost comes down, where do you see your career going, or where do you want to take your career? Because if you want to be in that development sphere, if you want to be, develop web GIS applications and dashboards and all those sorts of things, then the skills to learn are around that. It sort of almost comes down to, it's that developer type thing. So, you're learning Python, you're learning HTML, you're learning, if you're in an Esri environment, you're learning how to use Experience Builder and Survey 123 and all those sorts of peripheral tools. You're learning how portals work, those sorts of things. If you're really interested in the system administration and the database administration, then it's more learning about how infrastructure works. And so that's probably less a GIS skill, but more an IT skill. But how does it work into the cloud? How does it how do I move data around? And if you're then into the analysis side, then they're the skills where you go, all right, well, what tools do I want to use for that analysis? Is that an open source tool like QGIS or ArcGIS, or is it, using a programming language like R or Python to actually automate and modulate the whole process? So long term, you need to then, figure out where you want to go. But the single piece of advice for that question is to just keep learning. Don't try and go, all right, yep, I've now done my degree, I've now done a course in Python, that's it. In my career, software has come and gone, programming languages have come and gone, types of printers, types of storage, it went from tape storage to floppy disks to CDs to DVDs to digital, and now in the cloud in, someone's data center. And so you just got to keep on learning. That's the bottom line in anything, but certainly within GIS. Sunil, thank you. There is a GIS solution for industry in fact forever, but still GIS professionals face problems finding the right place. Yes. That's sometimes strange. I understand that the shift in technology must be adopted, but there is also not helping completely. How do you see this? Excuse me, that's all right. I don't mind typos. I'm doing them all the time. I guess I think what you're trying to say is that when you start in the GIS industry, well, it probably starts earlier than that. When you're at university doing your whatever degree you're doing, and whether that's a degree in GIS or whether that's a couple of GIS courses, you'll do some projects, and that'll start some interest in certain silos of where GIS is used. And often, people will get their first job, and then that might be in transport, or it might be in environment, or it might be in defense, or wherever. And if they stay there for a reasonable time, then they may not even try to look for, if they move jobs, they'll stay within the same sector. And that's not a bad thing. That's where your skill set is. But one of the really good things about GIS is that you can take it pretty well anywhere. A point is a point, and a line and a line, and a polygon, whether you're talking, a gas pipeline or a river. Yes, the underlying attributes are different. The underlying way that those digital representations work are different, but it's still a line. It's got attributes. It has connectivity. It might have, those lines might form a polygon, if it's a lake or a river, or a substation area for electrical network. And so I think, yes, I agree that sometimes GIS professionals sort of get pigeonholed, and it's hard to then look beyond what they've done. And sometimes that's a matter of, all right, networking once again, but probably more networking in a person-to-person sense, like attending conferences or attending social professional gatherings to see what other people are doing. This day and age where you can work from home a good majority of the time, you get even more isolated. And so getting out and interacting with those people, with other people in the industry, is really good, just to sort of see how it's used. And, our industry, for its good and bad parts, we've got this umbrella term, spatial, which includes everything from, everything that has a location. So, data that comes from surveyors, the GIS work that's done to analyze and visualize the work. But you also then got your Earth observation side, and they all sort of interact and cross over. But I think one of the real differences with GIS, in its own right, is that it is able to be in so many different industries, and so used in so many different ways, and it's just about trying to find that place. So Neil, I'm not sure whether I really answered that question, but the technology is the same now, where you are, no matter what country you are. It's just the application of it. And if you're open-minded enough to then, try and broaden your horizon into different sectors, then great. If you're happy being in a single sector for your whole career, that's great as well. I know plenty of people who are, have just worked in water utilities for their entire career. So yeah, it's has its pros and cons, and but once again, a bit like an answer I gave earlier, just keep learning. That's that sort of part of it. You keep learning, and then you might go, oh, I really like that programming side of it, or I really like that data manipulation side of it. And so that might take your career in a slightly different direction, either out of the points, lines, and polygons of GIS altogether, if you go down the whole data management point of view, or it might just be using GIS technologies in a different way. All right. No worries. I appreciate that question, even with its typos. So does anyone else have any questions? I'm not sure how many people on the call today are from Australia, or more specifically, not that I'm in either of these states, New South Wales or Queensland, but state of origin's on tonight, hence why I've got this shirt on. My state of origin is New South Wales. So big football game on, rugby league game, depending on what your terminology of football is. So I'm hoping to watch that tonight. It's not for a few hours. So any more questions? We've got a couple more minutes before we wrap up. Happy to answer another couple of questions if need be. Otherwise, we have these job seeker chats every Wednesday afternoon, same time. I've just started getting the technology right to record each one of them, so there'll be recordings of them placed up on our YouTube channel and on the Together Spatial website. On a Tuesday, 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we run a webinar called Points, Lines and Polygons, where I interview an individual from some part of the industry, how they got their start, where they go. So look for that. Also, if you need help at any point with your resume, your job applications, visa questions, course questions, whatever, like we covered tonight, just reach out to me, send me an email and say, Dean, can you review my resume? Or you can make a time with me and we can, have a one-on-one and look at those, whatever you're trying to do. It may be, as someone said earlier about the rejection, trying to figure out why. And sometimes that's, just needing an extra pair of eyes to look at your application, look at anything that is coming back, or even, how to structure a reply back to get more information. So more than happy to do that anytime. But I do appreciate everyone who's jumped on for today, and happy. Hopefully, I'll see you again next week. If not, whenever, like I said, it's on every Wednesday afternoon, 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Time. And I look forward to your questions. Have a great night, everyone, and thanks for being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.